Welcome to our podcast. This is Friends on Fire.
I'm Mike. I'm a lifelong devotee of financial independence. I even wrote a book about it.
And I'm Maggie, a newer convert, but just as passionate, especially on the intersection of minimalism and financial independence.
We're one and the same.
We are two like-minded friends who believe that talking about money with your friends and family opens the door to financial well-being.
The Friends on Fire podcast is about dispelling myths, building financial acumen, and sharing your financial independence journey with the people you care about.
This is Friends on Fire.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Maggie.
Hey, Chris and Deb.
Hi.
Hey, guys.
Hi, how's it going?
Great. How are y'all?
Good.
Good. I like how you threw that y'all in there. Did you do that for us, Chris?
For sure. Atlanta folks, got to throw y'all in.
I like it.
Yeah, I'm from the Midwest, though, so I still don't say y'all.
Sorry.
I say y'all. It's a bad habit. I can't get rid of it. Or a good habit, perhaps.
But Chris, very thoughtful of you to do so.
Yes,
hey, I'm always thinking of you guys.
Use guy. I was trying to think what do they say in Colorado?
I don't know. We're such a blend of all sorts of states. So yeah, depends on where you are.
Everyone's a guy. Doesn't matter their gender.
I say I have three. We have all girls, which we could talk about later. Across all of our families, we have nothing but girls. And I catch myself saying guys a lot to the girls and thinking like, should I adjust that considering there are no guys in this group of people I'm talking to? It's just a habit.
Somehow, I'm sure.
I'm doing it in plenty of other ways. Okay, so we jumped into all sorts of stuff. Let me actually tell our listeners who Deb and Chris are, because we're super excited to have them on today. So first off, you're going to hear this theme every now and then, but I met Deb and Chris at FinCon, and their energy was just immediately so positive and engaging, and they were just so nice and kind people. And I just are the sort of people where I meet and within 5 minutes, I'm like, I would like to be friends with these people. And so immediately we start talking about, just what we're both doing in our lives. And I think within like 2 minutes of talking, we get into a pretty deep conversation, which is great. So let me tell you guys who they are, though. I took some of this from this beautiful, I don't know how to call it, like an essay or a write-up that you have on your website, but when I read it, it speaks to me. So I'm going to take some pieces verbatim because I think it's a good intro for our listeners. So Chris and Deb, first off, are a married couple. They have 2 daughters. As we just mentioned, we've all got girls amongst our families. They live in Colorado. They had built a life that was safe and secure, as they describe, with steady paychecks, pensions, 401ks, 2 amazing daughters, 2 dogs, the whole white picket fence type of life. So this lifestyle allowed them to visit the mountains or the beach on weekends, or perhaps for 1 week during a work-granted vacation each year. They instead decided to put conventions and expectations aside and step towards a less conventional and more curious life. They began to question the necessity of it all and the plausibility of putting off their dreams until a traditional retirement. Putting those dreams off left them feeling hollow and incomplete. They are now living what they call their bucket list life. And we're going to dig into more today on how they got here and what that life looks like for them. And they created this whole platform called Go Bucket Yourself, which we'll talk more about, where they help individuals, couples, and families overcome fear, adjust their mindset, handle their finances, and plan adventures in a way that allows them to quit putting their dreams on hold or on a waiting list and start to live their bucket life list today. So I know that was a bit of a mouthful, but you say it so eloquently on your website. I thought it would be helpful for people to hear that. Is there anything else you want to share about yourselves before we jump into some more specific questions?
Oh, just thank you for sharing that so nicely. I forgot all about that piece of writing on there. And the feelings are definitely mutual, especially after having you as a guest on our podcast and getting to know you better in that way. Mike, looking forward to getting to know you also. But thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good summary or a good starting point, I think.
Sounds great.
So the first thing we like to do with all of our interviews is start from the very beginning and ask about your childhoods and how you were raised financially and how that impacted you today.
Such a light question to start.
Yeah, feel free to dump in all the childhood trauma you want into this answer.
Yeah. This will be a little therapeutic, I'm sure. So I guess my childhood was kind of a mixed bag. I don't know if that's fairly common. but grew up primarily feeling very stable, though not wealthy family by any means, but just like hardworking class type of like good old fashioned values type of family. And then my parents divorced and our financial situation became much less stable. And so through that, I think that's where my financial like mindset developed in this time in my life, which was preteen and teen years. And that left me with, I guess, very limited beliefs about money and my ability to earn money. And yeah, so that's the deeper answer to that question, which I've been working through as an adult.
That's fascinating. And especially your reference to, a lot of people's financial situation as they're growing up as kids is, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's more bleak, but often it's somewhat consistent, right? Just to even hear that you kind of had this moment where it changed for you is interesting also. What about you, Chris?
Yeah. So my parents actually divorced when I was like 1. So I never remembered a life with them being together. I lived with my mom, primary custody throughout those years, which was a combination of single mom with a kiddo. And then she got married again. That lasted a couple of years, divorced again. That lasted a couple of years, then back. So thankfully, though, we grew up in an area around a lot of family. So I grew up with my grandparents quite a bit. And one thing with them having survived the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, like out here in Kansas and Colorado during the 30s, not only was there a depression, but there was also pretty much the land was dry and blowing away. So I grew up with the mindset of anything can disappear at any time. And so you just hold on to any penny you have, any dollar you have. And so I learned a lot of frugality from my grandparents, and my mom was actually a little bit on the flip side of that. Like she was more of probably like Debbie's mindset where it's like, it could all disappear. So what's the sense of holding on to it? So I kind of saw the compare and contrast between my grandparents and my mom. And so we grew up with my mom. We grew up, probably always around minimum wage until she got into her 30 or, later in her 30s and 40s. And even then, once she married my stepdad, who's a farmer, it's, the boom years, which I'm throwing air quotes out there if you can't see that, but the boom years are like you're breaking even, maybe making a little profit. And the bust years mean, oh crap, how are we going to pay our bills and all that kind of stuff. So money to me, I learned early on could disappear, but for some reason I never felt helpless against that, but I started to covet it quite a bit. Like it became a huge source of inspiration, motivation. For whatever reason, I believed I could control it. I could hoard it. I could hold on to it. I didn't want to let it go away to anyone else. And so I kind of developed some mindsets that weren't so healthy around that aspect, even though it did allow me to add to my bank account fairly regularly. It wasn't always a great mindset with how I chose to let go of that money or criticized others on how they handled their money.
That's so interesting. Like Mike said, we always start asking people that question because I just think there's a lot of people, there's so much that people have learned and some of these kind of habits and expectations and mindsets around money that come from our childhood, but then can evolve and be changed through all of our experiences as we get older. So at one point on your website, you say that your hearts and souls called for something more, right? You were like all the things that I was kind of reading about, like you on the outside, you had it all, right? You had the paychecks, the retirement, pensions, 401ks, all that stuff, a great family, even the 2 dogs. And you said your hearts and souls were calling for something more. So I want to kind of dig into like, how did that come across? Like, was there a specific moment? Was it a growing feeling? Like, when did you start to realize that feeling and how did it kind of evolve and turn into changes that you made in your life?
In my early 30s, I started to have some health issues. that just kept sort of mounting and like a cloud over me. And my job, to be clear, was in education. I was a teacher, all different roles and all different kinds of teaching, but just primary education, mostly classroom teacher. So I didn't make a lot of money per hour when you looked at my job anyway. And as I went on, I was like stepping into more leadership roles where I would need to be in meetings at night after work, like picking up my kids from work late, or going to some professional development opportunities on weekends. And it just kept mounting. And at the same time, I was working on my health. And eventually, I started to realize, like, I don't know if I'm going to live to retirement. I mean, no one knows, but this put it really clear in front of my face. And that just started like a whole slew of new questions. So that when one time a coworker came to me and she was super excited about this class on a weekend, which I would normally be very excited about. And I was like, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to do it. And she said, well, don't worry, we'll get a stipend. And I was like, man, it just clicked. Like, I don't need more money. I need more time. And so that's where my sort of questioning began, was like, how do I get more time? Like, that's more valuable to me than money at this point in my life. And then it caused some very difficult and open conversations with Chris that eventually led to me stepping away from my job, thinking that would sort of solve all these issues, which, like, cut to the end, it didn't. But it was the beginning of something bigger and better for us, I think.
Yeah. And so, just to really emphasize that point of, I was very content on my plan, which was Debbie had a pension system through teaching. I had a pension system through my work. We also contributed to IRAs and 401ks. So I could do the math and spreadsheets all day long. And I could see at 65, Chris and Debbie's life is going to look pretty damn good. We're going to have a lot of time. We're going to have a decent amount of money and all that kind of stuff. So this just completely, because I'm a planner and I love long distance planning. And so this, when she started getting those diagnoses and some of those initial diagnoses that we were reading, because this was all brand new to us, like if you go down that rabbit hole, not very deep, you can see, or, death, or death, or death, so like the symptoms could spell a pretty bleak future for us. And so my whole financial picture was based on us getting to 65 and then living the good life. And then all of a sudden at 30, 65 looks an extremely long ways away. And some of these were like, well, 35 might be a gamble. So yeah, I went to a place of fear and a lot of hard conversations. It took about a decade to kind of get to the other side of some of those fears that I'm just now starting to realize why those happened and everything. So that was definitely that inflection point in our lives that took us out of, we're following the path that everybody else, most people live, our neighbors live, and all that kind of stuff, and heading on to a different path that not many people at that point in time that we knew about were living. That's
a really interesting story. And I think it's, dare I say, not uncommon for people. I think the situation you were in probably, very specific and unique to your family, but everybody, I think, is going to have some sort of event in their life. Medical, I think, is going to be pretty common. Could be some other family, death of a friend, something like that really triggers something. And so that your story is very relatable. Can you walk us through the specifics of like the timeline of how you started making decisions to change? So you mentioned, Deb, you were early 30s when you first started having these thoughts. Chris, you mentioned about a decade of working on it. Can you kind of take us through some of the specifics and when you decided to make a change and when you made it and where you are now?
So one of the earliest changes was because neither of us had really been to a doctor outside of like here's a health screening. They're going to draw your blood and tell you if you have high cholesterol or anything like that. So we didn't really know the medical system that well. And I'm a very simple guy, grow up in a very rural, simple world. And so my thought was, your body's failing you, Deb. I'm going to start a garden and start growing food, and that will help in some aspect. I didn't know how. And so that was kind of like the first, like, we need to make a change. The only change I could think of is we need to put better food in your body, because I had started to see some documentaries about how food and health are way more related, especially, 10 years ago, 12 years ago than we thought. And so then that just kind of in my mind started a ball rolling of maybe what we've been told is good and healthy in this area, food, is not necessarily good and healthy in other areas. So that led to, money talks and considerations. That led to our physical, like exercise. That led to stress. That led to meditation. We started kind of opening the gamut of all these self-help type of items. That was the realm that I knew a lot about, or not knew a lot about, that I've had a lot of faith that if we make these adjustments ourselves, they can pay dividends. Whereas Deb had the more complex issue of like, okay, how do I treat these individual diseases that are happening inside of my body?
But like more specifically to timeline, I think I started going to doctors and getting diagnoses around 31. By 34, I believe, is when I stepped away from my job. 34, 35 maybe. So I worked for a few years trying to do it all, like get healthy, be perfect at my job, still be like the perfect mom and wife. And that just didn't work. And like I said, I just had that aha. And so I stepped away from my job around 34, 35. And that certainly didn't solve all my problems. It gave me time to like expose the deeper issues of what was causing some problems though. And I think as I had time and freedom, then Chris started to see that time and freedom and wonder how he could also get some of that, and had a boss come in unexpectedly, that a new CEO that he wasn't in alignment with. And so it looked like, oh, maybe I won't love this job forever like I thought I would. I don't have as much control as I thought I do. And so as he was researching all of these things at the same time, he was researching like passive income. And we alluded to this with your first question about both of us having limiting beliefs about money. And so we were pretty good at saving money and not having debt, but we weren't as good at maybe using some of that money to grow itself or investing. And so we started learning a lot more about investing and decided with the amount of cash we had that real estate investing was a good idea for us. And so then we put like so much of our energy and time into buying passive, buy and hold rentals. And I said passive, I meant to say just buy and hold rentals. And that just kept the ball rolling in the direction of where we're at now. Like, okay, now we have the freedom to not have W-2 jobs. What is the real meaning of our life, and what do we really want? So I have so many questions from some different things you said, but just to continue putting the timeline together, because I think it's interesting to kind of hear people's journeys from that perspective. Chris, when did you end up leaving your job?
I just celebrated my 2-year quit-iversary. I think on the 27th of November, 2019. So
congratulations.
2 years ago.
Yay. Congratulations. And so how long, like when you, Deb, you mentioned that you stepped away from your job when you were 34 or 35, and then Chris was starting to see what that looked like, and it looked nice in many ways, it sounds like. How long was that gap where you were the only one who had quit working?
Pretty long, because I think 2014 was my last official year of teaching.
So about 5 years. But
then I was only home for a year, I think, before we decided to buy our first rental. Okay. Maybe it wasn't even a full year.
2016 was when we started buying.
Okay. So yeah, it was just like a year or two before we decided, like, let's start making some passive income. So if Chris wants to leave his job, he can. And so we made a plan and some projections and thought like, oh, maybe we could do it in this many years or whatever. But how many rentals do you have now?
19.
Oh, 19. I knew you had some rental
incredible.
properties, but I thought you had like, something I could count on my hand, perhaps.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah. They're mostly like 2 and 3 bedroom in very middle class parts of America. So it's not like, I've got $19 million homes or anything.
Yeah. I'm just curious, like, what's the average cost of the types of homes you're buying in Colorado, or if they're around you?
They started when we first started buying them around 60-ish thousand. And so I think the most we ever paid for a property was around 84,000. And they all followed that 1% rule of like, if you buy it for 80,000, it needs to rent for 800 a month. In the early days, 2016, that was not too hard to do in both Memphis, Tennessee, where we invest, and here in Colorado, southeastern Colorado, not Denver.
Denver's crazy. Yeah.
We were really fortunate where we live is very rural and not necessarily the typical Colorado market. So we got a place for like a little more than 30,000 and put a little bit of rehab into it. So we were able at that time to get some very affordable,
that's awesome.
Cheap, like 2-bed, 1-bath homes. So that helped for sure.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's certainly different parts in Atlanta, but some of the places Mike and I are buying rental properties, I mean, they're like $300,000 so it's just harder to like amass a large quantity, and it's harder to get that ratio too.
All right. So you have 19 rental homes, which is impressive, even if they're like lower cost homes than you might find in other major cities.
Regardless.
It's the same amount of work to manage one home, regardless of if it's $50,000 or $500,000. So kudos to you guys. That's impressive. Can you help us with some of the other numbers in your life? If we can ask, like, how much free cash flow do these rental homes generate? And how does that compare to your cost of living for your family?
Yeah. So the number we built off of was, I read this one book, Retire Early on Rentals. And in her story, her and her husband were like, if we accumulate enough properties at 200 a month, that we can retire when we get to whatever their number was. So we actually, that was my goal at first. Like, oh, well, she's already laid out the blueprint. As long as I can cash flow $200 a month. So that was the number we aimed for, and kind of the number
from each door.
Yeah. So each.
Okay. I was like, that's a really, like, I was like, are you living off $200 a month? I'm impressed.
Yes, that's why our thermostat's not on there.
Exactly.
No, but so yeah, 200 per door. So I was, our average cash flow kind of works out to that, to where we're about 4,000 a month is what our rentals bring us. So 19 times 200 a month is 3,800. It's actually, it does a decent bit better than that. But when I first stepped away, that was kind of the number we were banking on. And that's close enough to the number that we see with the rentals that we own.
Yeah. So what I think is interesting about your path and story, I believe, I want to kind of lay this out to see if it's accurate, is, you had these different realizations that started with health issues and health concerns. And just like, I love how you kind of said, you were realizing that by the time you got to 65 or sorry, that you may not get to 65, right? You had this whole plan of I'll get to 65 and then I'll live the good life. Two things. One, a lot of people, even when they get to 65, they're starting to experience health issues. So you'll live the good life as a 65-year-old, which is a lot different than living the good life as a 45-year-old, perhaps. What I kind of heard through your story is it's not like when all those things happened, you crazy crunched and saved and got to some financial independence number. You more realized you could do real estate investing and get to the passive income that you needed to get to sustain your lifestyle until you're 65 or whatever that is. And is that sort of financially where you were at in terms of your quote early retirement planning?
Yeah, I think what we did realize was our strengths were that we had been savers and we hadn't accumulated a lot of personal debt. And beyond that, we were still had a pretty low risk tolerance. So we knew we had a finite amount of cash to begin investing with. And when you look at the 4% rule, right, we were like, ooh, it's going to take us quite a while to be able to just invest passively in like VTSA VTSAX or something like that. And when we saw how we could use leverage with real estate, how much quicker we could get to financial independence that way, that's why we began choosing that route. I mean, still simultaneously investing in the market as we went, but that was our primary focus. And then, like Chris was saying, we had goals just based on like, okay, if every door we buy can make us at least $200 in cash flow, then we're set in this amount of time. If we can get this many houses each year. But actually what happened was most of our doors ended up making more than $200 a month. And we were able to acquire more homes than we expected we could get per year because we were buying in Memphis and we were buying at home and doing our own rehab and stuff. And so I think that began to like help us question our limiting beliefs, where it was like, this is actually happening faster than we thought it was. It's actually, allowing for more money to reinvest than we thought it would. And so yeah, I don't know if I'm even answering your question. I just wanted to be clear about that. And I think with like monthly cash flow, some months, honestly, it's like 7,000, and some months, depending on what's happening, it's less. And so it averages out to maybe around 4,000 a month or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of how rentals go. Some months are less than others.
Well, you very much answered my question, so thank you. A couple follow-on questions. One, what is your average annual cost of living for your family? Like, I imagine you guys have a rough sense.
Yeah, I have a very detailed sense.
More specific, yeah, better than rough.
So I kind of break it out in two ways. Like our true cost of living is less than $1,500 a month for like, this is, and because we don't have a mortgage, this will keep our utilities paid and all the non-discretionary items covered is $1,500 a month. And then we, since we make more than that on average, the rest of that ends up being discretionary or continuing to invest. And so we travel a fair amount, but then I've also picked up travel hacking. So I've actually spent a lot less than I'm setting aside every month for our travel budget. And it feels like we're traveling about as much as we want to travel. And so I don't really want to upgrade any more travel or anything like that. So I guess that's the quick answer.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So it's about $1,500 a month minus your travel, essentially.
So $1,500 a month.
Discretionary.
Yeah. So then I usually budget in about another $1,000 a month of discretionary stuff, like gift giving and travel and all that kind of stuff. But travel is the dominant category in that discretionary spending. That
is a very impressive cost of living, I think for the lifestyle that you guys are living, right? That you do travel and how old are your kids now?
16 and 11, two daughters.
And I think that's like a bare bones projection so that all of his spreadsheets, he felt comfortable knowing like, well, if we had to just, if something happened, there's always the like, if something bad happens when you're using spreadsheets or deciding if you should leave or whatever. But yeah, certainly our cost of living, our lifestyle is pretty low, but we do a lot of fun things like skiing and traveling and definitely aren't sacrificing.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'll throw in this real quick tip. Hopefully it won't take too long. But so like the other thing too is like our daughters, we're not buying them iPhones or expensive doodads or whatever. So when they compare their lives to their friends, it might look a little different. I don't really think we're sacrificing that much or they're sacrificing that much in many ways. But one kind of hack that we also use, especially now that they're 16, 11, but we started this at the very beginning days when they were 11 and 6, is they are employees of the real estate company. So they help us file papers, they help us rehab some places and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of their discretionary spending is actually paid for because they've earned an income from us, AKA a deduction from our real estate business and all that. So even when they do want to splurge on, I want an iPad or I want AirPods or whatever those things are, in essence, that's a tax deduction for us because they earned that money by that. And they also contribute to their Roth IRA when they make money from our real estate business. Nice. And
that is awesome.
Yeah.
So. That's a good point though, because that's a hidden thing that we we don't budget necessarily for activities and like, you know, gifts for our kids as much because we pay them and then they can pay for those things sometimes.
Yeah, that is like win-win-win because there's great tax advantages to it. I've read about that strategy. And while I am still a W-2 employee, is not something I can take as much advantage of, but I love the concept. And it's also a win for them because they're learning work ethic and accountability and to manage their own money. And I love it just because it really does have benefits, you know, all around and some really long-term benefits with them and lessons that they learn through that. So
that's a hope.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully it's working. I'm just curious about how many hours would you say you each are working on the rental business with those 19 doors?
I need to do a better job of tracking this, but I would say on average, it's maybe for me, an hour a week of like bookkeeping stuff. And then when we're placing tenants for the ones we self-manage, it can jump up to like 10 to 12 hours a week or whatever. So if you spread it out over the year, I like to think like 2 hours a week for me, probably about the same for you or whatever.
Yeah, we do have one Airbnb, and sometimes because of where we live, there really aren't any property managers around. It's not super easy to, you know, have someone do that Airbnb work for us. So it just depends on when a place is turning over, if that place turns over and we don't have someone to help out. But yeah, on average, it's not much until our leases come up and we see how many tenants renew and don't renew.
That's what I wanted to get a sense of. It is an extreme part-time job, right? It's not become this like stress where you might as well be, you know, doing some other job, which is great to hear because that's what it should be. That's what the vision is when you're setting that up.
And just a note, like anything can become a major stress. I learned that about myself when I left my job. So that's kind of like an inside job, learning how to develop a mindset that doesn't necessarily see like the worst case scenario with all of those outside inputs and doesn't let that maybe affect me internally as much. But no, from the place we sit now, it is not a super stressful, time intensive job that we do.
So Deb, I wanted to double click on that anyways, but since you just said it, you talked a little bit about it just now, but you made a couple of references to like stepping away from your job didn't solve all your issues, right? Did not solve all your problems. It just gave you time to kind of expose the problems. What else did you learn through that in terms, I think you said it's an inside job, right? But like, what else did you learn through that process of what you expected was going to happen when you left versus what you had to self-manage that you would turn into advice for others?
I think the big like overarching theme is this idea of destination addiction, which Chris might roll his eyes because he's probably heard me say that so much. But it's like when I leave my job, then all my problems will be solved, right? Like I will get healthier and I will be happy and I can be the perfect wife and mom and all of these things. And for some people, and certainly for me at one point in my life, it was like, well, when I get this car, everything's going to be great because it's going to like, for some reason, this car or this house are going to solve all of my problems. And what I learned was you get the thing or you accomplish your goal and you're still left with the same issues inside. And so, you know, if there is like a lesson in that, it's that like find what time and energy you do have to work on the deeper underlying issue now on your way to the place you want to be or the goal you hope to accomplish. And sometimes that helps us change our goals and realize like, oh, that isn't what I really wanted. I thought that's what I really wanted because I wasn't like getting to this deeper issue. And sometimes it makes getting the goal or the accomplishment that much sweeter because we've done the work on the way there. So I think that's the big thing. Yeah, I thought like my job is so stressful, it's making me sick. And I left my job and I was still stressed out and busy all the time because I had just like replaced my job with all of these other things in my life that people asked me to do or I decided made me a good person. And so I still had to unpack all of those things and the deeper issues.
So Deb, that's a really fascinating mindset. And I think I would agree with you. One, I'm curious though, would you say that for your situation and for people who are trying to reach fire, that even though they need to be doing work up to the destination, and I guess my question, did you also have to also leave your job in order to realize your full potential in achieving those goals?
Yeah, I mean, what a privilege, first of all, that I could leave my job. And I definitely see it as that, you know. And second, yes, it gave me the time and energy and creative space to be able to get to that deeper place of growth. And so, yes. And the only reason I do reiterate that is because I just don't want to paint an unrealistic picture for anyone seeking this as their destination. That it is the thing that's going to solve all the things. And for some people, it might be like they may just have a job that sucks and they are tired and burned out and they need some time and space. For me, it wasn't. It just exposed like my ego and how I had protected it and how it showed up and how I really needed to heal that. But yes, I don't believe I ever would have gotten there. I mean, I would be sicker and still using the same like coping and numbing mechanisms that I did then. So it did expose that.
And let me just tag on, because I also am 2 years in work in progress on some of my bleep, you know, that I'm trying to work on here. And I wouldn't have like because I listen to a boatload of podcasts. If I would have listened to a podcast that said, hey, start working on your stuff now before you retire, then you'll be even better off in retirement. I wouldn't even have known what I need to work on until I got to the place where I had enough space to breathe, enough place. And that's a nice part about both of us being done is we're basically each other's counselors and feedback friends.
That sounds unhealthy.
Well, probably in some levels it is. But I really wouldn't have been able to do the work. So I guess my piece of advice is you're not nuts if you get to early retirement and you have all this time for traveling and hiking and backpacking and doing all the things you want, but there's still this piece of you that feels off or incomplete or unhealed. And that's, I'm going to go ahead and call it normal because there's definitely some people out there like that. And it's one of the things I love, even though it's hard work. It's one of the things that I'm like, this is the type of effing work that if I do this type of work, my life is actually going to be better in many ways and hopefully in ways that I can help create better people around me as far as like they you know, so.
Yeah, that work, I think that was very well. All the points from what you were asking, Mike, to what Deb and Chris just said, I think it's a super important point to be realistic and pragmatic kind of going into a journey like this. And it's going to pay dividends to your point, right? That work you're doing that you were just talking about, Chris. Yeah. So on the note of kind of everything we're talking about right now, one of the things in addition to your rental property empire, I'm going to call it an empire with 19 properties, or maybe when you get to 20, you can call it an empire. When you get to 20, we'll formally call it an empire. Is, you know, you have been kind of so motivated by your own journey that you wanted to help others. And so you created the platform Go Bucket Yourself, which is the name of your podcast and website and some other things. So tell us a little bit about what that is, because I feel like it's tied into this journey that you both have been on and the learnings that you've been having with yourselves.
Yeah. So the premise is that we wanted something in this encore chapter of our lives to a career that still helped me to feel important or feel validated. Like I'm not just, watching Netflix and that kind of stuff. So in preparation for me leaving, I was like, what am I going to do? I love nature. I love the outdoors. So I could think of a lot of my hobbies that would get an exponential lift in how many hours I'm dedicating to them. But I kind of knew at that point even that I'm not just going to go hike and backpack. Otherwise, my kids will never see me. And that's not the life I want to live. So I did want to start exploring more about like taking the information that we had gathered, taking the stories of ourselves, but also taking the stories of others and trying to serve other serve other people and inspire others to kind of exit their limiting belief mindsets that we had both found ourselves in these middle stages of life, and to kind of erase some of those mindsets that I can't do X because I didn't, I wasn't rich, or I can't do this because I'm not fill in the blank. And so that's what it started as, is like, we want to help others. We don't exactly know how, like what are our tactics that are going to be, but we wanted to help others. And so right now that's materializing as a podcast and a little bit of a blog, but not too much of a blog. But ultimately what we want to do, or what I really, really want to do, is to hold like events like retreats and things like that, where people come together. Here's the theme of this event, and create kind of this tight-knit community using the outdoors, using the lessons we've learned, and potentially like guest speakers or guest whatevers for our events to help bring people together and grow in these areas that sometimes we find ourselves stuck in as humans.
Will you host some of these in Colorado?
We will.
Count me in then, please.
Mike's in.
Yeah, I'll sell you your ticket right now.
Mike and I are in.
That's amazing to hear. We'll have one sooner than we thought, maybe.
We'll bring our spouses too. You already got 4 people RSVP.
Yes.
Perfect.
All right.
I just want to share from like a female perspective that maybe something that will sound controversial or surprising. What I found when I left my job, thinking like, I just want to be a stay-at-home mom and wife, was that really wasn't enough. I was like deeply depressed. And so it came back to a couple of things for me. Like, one was getting healthy really does require human connection and most likely purpose. And so after I got over feeling guilty about being a wife and a mom isn't everything, it's not going to do it all for me. This underlying thing of like, well, what is my purpose now when I don't need my purpose to bring me any income? And I think that's what this is for both of us. It's just a way we could hopefully use our strengths, our little bit of knowledge to empower other people and showcase other humans that are doing amazing things that we, admire or could learn from. And this was a way we could do it together, but kind of like Chris's baby, his idea, and just a way I could maybe help him along the way with it. So.
And one of the big helps too, I'll go ahead under this umbrella of Go Bucket Yourself, was Debbie spent as part of her healing from some undealt with trauma from her childhood, was she wrote a book. And so like, that's another piece that she just released in February that was a very instrumental piece in both. It was nice because as both one of her editors and the reader of her book, it was like, these are conversations that we've had, but I didn't really understand truly until I read her book or whatever, and everything. But that's also one thing, another way that we're trying to kind of take our stories and our mistakes and our whatevers and trying to help other folks to maybe either avoid them or to just realize that, okay, I'm not a horrible person, or I'm not alone if I have these problems too. So.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because I actually was going to ask Deb about her book. I will put a link to her book in the show notes. And I will say your book has been on my reading list, and it's on that list of like, when I have more time, when I the growing list. It's on my bucket list, which I told you guys before we started is a list I have started since I met you two, where I actually call it my bucket list of all of the things that large and small, that I want to do when I have more time, and that hopefully will fill the purpose and connection and a lot of the things that you guys were just talking about also.
That's so nice. Thank you so much. I loved hearing about your bucket list too. So it's inspiring.
Yeah, well, you're on it. So, and then I see you doing things like Chris just climbed Cotopaxi, and then I'm like, oh, I need some mountains on my bucket list, literal mountains. So I know we're running out of time, and not for future conversations, but just for today's. This is a fun question that we sometimes like to end on. If we gave you a billboard that would be seen by millions, what message would you want to write on that billboard to share with the world?
Deep. I would say for mine, it would be don't put your dreams on a waiting list.
I like it.
The only thing really coming up for me right now is if you truly loved yourself, what would you do?
I love that one too. Yeah. These are good answers.
I like it.
Nice work, guys.
You'd say that to everyone, I'm sure.
No, these were some of the best.
These are good. And what's funny is they're different, but they're similar. They're the same end point said very differently.
All right. Well, Chris and Deb, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great to get to know you. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to meet in person at FinCon, but I feel like we're now friends, and I look forward to seing you at next year's FinCon and in Colorado when we come to your first
I was going to say,
event.
We're committed to Chris's event. So,
well, that's amazing. Thank you both for having us. Nice to meet you, Mike. And definitely we're friends forever now. So we can't wait.
We're friends on fire.
That's
for
right.
Sure.
I even got my little
nice. Got the sticker.
Hold on. That's awesome.
Yep. No, thank you so much for having us on. It's been a blast.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chris and Deb. We have so enjoyed this discussion. And thank you. Bye,
Thanks,
Mike.
guys. Bye.
Bye, Chris. Bye, Deb.
Bye.